Definitely. So Gabon was the most recent country in Africa to have a coup against their what they're saying are French neo-colonial leaders. But as we were looking into it, the U.S. is definitely one of the neo-colonial powers that at least controls a lot of Gabon's economy. And one of the main things that the coup leaders and the people are demanding is that the French military bases get out. So they're really focusing on France right now, but obviously these are just Western multinationals that have been exploiting the country for a long time. And they have this leader, Ali Bongo, who's been in power, or whose family has been in power for 53 years. So nothing but a Western puppet dictatorship, and one that's been in power for like, I believe Richard Medhurst said that'd be like 9 U.S. presidencies in a row. So, you know, and oftentimes I had this written in my notes too. Oftentimes Africa kind of goes under the radar. Like when I was researching Niger, I read that whenever they had their last election, it was recently, there was a great deal of evidence that the U.S. just rigged the election. It looked like their guy was going to lose, so they, funneled a bunch of money into the country, and there were all these suspicious things that happened on voting day, and basically rigged the election against Niger. And even in the quote unquote leftist or socialist media, you didn't hear much about that. So it's great to see Africa getting more attention. It's great to see all these neo-colonial uprisings, because we know as Marxists, or just people who are rational and follow geopolitics, colonialism never ended. You'll, if you read a history book right now, it'll say, colonialism ended after World War II, because all these countries were given what we call flag independence. They said you are no longer a direct political colony of Western country A, but Western countries still control the economies of these countries, and they use that control to prop up puppet dictatorships that give them whatever they want. So if you control the economic base of a country, if you control the surplus of that country, and the value that's created by the labor of that country, you control that country. If you control production, you pretty much control everything. So that's what's going on with Gabon. This was an article from the Gray Zone.
Can I just say something real
Yeah,
quick?
yeah. Sorry. I
About
didn't mean to get ahead of you.
the 53 years thing, because this is something specifically that the imperialists are always bringing out. They talk about the Castro dictatorship. You've been in power 5 decades or 6 decades or whatever it is, as if just being in power a very long time automatically constitutes a dictatorship, or as if democracy can be simply reduced to a constant change in which face is going to be the puppet that ends up, being the face of all the governmental decisions. And that's incorrect. There's genuinely the possibility that a leadership could remain the same for 50 and 60 years and not be a dictatorship. And the question that we must ask is, well, is it genuinely representing the will of the people? That's all democracy is. If you break it down, demos kratos, demos, the popular folk, common people, and kratos means power. Is this leadership genuinely a reflection of the will of the vast majority of the people, of the general will of the people? And so it doesn't matter how long they're in power. What matters is, are they capable of doing that? And you have, cases such as Cuba, where that was the case. You have cases such as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Free Korea, where that's also the case. Richard Medhurst, he brings it up in his segment, how the same thing happened with Assad and his father, where they brought stability to a region that was completely unstable thanks to neocolonialism and decades of colonialism and imperialism. And it was a government and a series of governments that were very much supported by their people. So that's not the same as the Bongo family, which has been from the start the puppet of French and American imperialists, and there has been a government, like all neocolonial governments, who only has to answer to one interest group, and it's not the people of Gabon. It is, the interest of U.S. and U.S. specifically, but French and imperialism in general. The interests of multinationals that he answers to. It's not the people of Gabon, and you see it recurring. It's not just one random thing that has happened. We've had 8 of these in the last 8 years. 8 years. We've had two in the last month. We just spoke about the coup in Niger not too long ago. Now we have another one in Gabon, and um, it's telling of the age and of the general crisis in the imperialist system, and the imperialist system in its stage of neocolonialism, which, as you mentioned, one of the central things that distinguishes it from before is that sort of flag sovereignty, where it's sovereign only in name, but in substance, their political economy and therefore their politics is fully controlled, usually by the same country which used to be the old metropole.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting point, the one you brought up about political dynasties. Like the Western liberal bourgeois media only critiques political dynasties if it's Assad, if it's the Kim family, even though, the Kim family is obviously there's a cult of personality there, and you would expect that after Kim Il Sung led his people in the War of Liberation against the Japanese colonizers, and then defended against the invading U.S. imperialists. But those leaders are elected, as is Assad, rightfully elected by their people, by a large majority of their people, actually. But those political dynasties aren't okay. The only political dynasties that are okay are the Clinton family or the Bush family or whatever puppet dictatorship that the U.S. is trying to prop up in Gabon. And something interesting about this article is Ali Bongo is actually really useful to the U.S. in their war on Libya, in that horrendous war that saw Gaddafi overthrown, where the U.S. and Hillary Clinton and NATO, who were leading this up, had no exit plan whatsoever. So they topple the country's government while backing a bunch of terrorist extremist groups and just dip. So now, warlords have been fighting in the power vacuum that's created. And, that's also why these sort of anti-imperialist coups are such a big deal geopolitically, right? The Western powers are losing the footholds that they previously had in Africa. We now had one in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and now Gabon, which Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are all in West Africa. Gabon, not so much, but still under the same sort of system of French neocolonialism. So there's this anti-imperialist, anti-colonial sentiment and real movement spreading across Africa. And, the there was, a huge anti-colonial movement across the global South at the end of World War II. But this is sort of like a resurgence of that, a resurgence against neo-colonialism. Like, we recognize that we have flag independence, but these countries are still super exploiting us for our resources, and they still have military bases all over. And eventually AFRICOM is going to be something they have to tackle too. The U.S. Africa Command, which allows them to maintain a constant shadow drone war across pretty much the entire continent of Africa. That kills a large number of civilians every year. That was greatly expanded by this man, Obama, by the way.
Yeah, and in many cases, it's you had the countries that were successful in that post-war period of decolonization, of entering the stage of what the imperialists call post-colonialism, or what we would call neocolonialism, a more insidious form of imperialism and colonialism. But you had the struggles that won and sustained power, and some of those countries are still around. And you had those that didn't, and a lot of the uprisings that we're seeing today are in countries that have, that weren't able to obtain their sovereignty. That went with that flag sovereignty that you're talking about, and but you also have countries that won for a period of time and then had their governments toppled. And you see that I think very clearly the archetypical case is Burkina Faso. and the coup and murder of Thomas Sankara, and then the sort of reincarnation that you have now with this series of what they're calling colonel coups, which are led by people in their 20s and 30s, sometimes trained even by the U.S., but turning against a system that they have been able to see has devastated, their parents, their grandparents, and is devastating their generations and providing no real future for their people. And Ibrahim Traore, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm sure I'm not, but he's almost like this resurgence of the spirit of Sankara in Burkina Faso, and it's beautiful to see. So it's hopefully that power can be sustained. A lot of these colonial coups, neocolonial, anti-neocolonial coups, um, they're not ideologically pure. That's one of the questions that I think people usually bring up. Like, are these socialist governments that are going to be brought forth? I don't know. It seems that a lot of them are driven by a deep patriotism, a deep love of their country, of their nation, and a desire to have their country, their resources, and their people not be looted, not continue to be looted by French and American and other multinational corporations that are stealing their wealth, making their countries dependent on these imperialist countries, and immiserating their people. So, insofar as they have that deep patriotic or nationalistic sentiment, you're going to have a similar effect to what you had with Fidel Castro, where that progressive nationalism eventually has to realize, if it stays there, that the only way out is socialism. The only way out is having the control over the land, the industries, the key industries of the country be in the hands of its working people, the vast majority of its people, and making those serve those working, those people themselves who would be running and operating and controlling those centers of production.
Very well said. And similar to Niger, this was a coup that was led by the security forces who are actually supposed to protect the president. And, some people might say that proves that it's an undemocratic coup or whatever. But similar to the coup in Niger, the people immediately hit the streets to show their support for the coup government and to demand that the French and other Western neo-colonial powers leave the country. Yeah, mass support for this. The parallel I always draw is Venezuela, although the military coup there was unsuccessful. And then Hugo Chavez, 8 years after the attempted military coup, was elected. But it's a progressive coup led by the military because it has the mass support from the people.
Absolutely, and there's quite a few of those in the history of the 20th century. You have, of course, Juan Velasco in Peru. We also have many others, and we have a project we're collaborating with the folks from the Hampton Institute with precisely this topic. But here it is: the people of Gabon hitting the streets against the puppet government of Bongo.
Coup de la démocratie.
So massive support from the people in the streets demanding that the French and the U.S. get out. And this is, I don't know if this has been confirmed yet. I saw this on Twitter and then saw this article about it. Apparently, the Bongo family, the former Western-backed dictators of the country, were seen leaving the money with bags and bags of cash given to them by Western powers. So, I mean, if it couldn't get, or if it could get any more obvious that they were a Western puppet leadership or whatever you want to call it. They had suitcases and suitcases of Western cash. So this is how the West gets these compradors to do this. This is how they got Blaise Compaoré to kill Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso. It's literally just preying on people's selfishness, via opportunism, saying that if you give us what we want in your country, we'll make sure that you don't get cooed. We'll protect you, and then we'll give you bags and bags of cash so you and your family can live in luxury, while the rest of the country gets exploited and is prevented from developing their productive forces. So pretty wild to see this.
That's another one of the central distinctions between neocolonialism and colonialism. Colonialism, all of the people from the colonized country were basically fucked. It was a very small. Perhaps you can have an intelligentsia that could have been educated in the metropole, but it was very difficult to even develop like a bourgeoisie and a national political class. A lot of the times, full control was in the metropole. In neocolonialism, there is a class that begins to benefit from neocolonialism, and it's these folks that Jose Marti would call gusanos de corbata, worms with bow ties. That's where we get the sort of slur against the treasonous Cubans from Miami. We call them gusanos. It comes from Jose Marti. These are people that are selling out their nations for a few bucks. But we had, by the way, that sort of running out with the bags. It reminds me of the Cuban Revolution when the bourgeoisie and the corrupt political class left. They left with the people's reserves. So they took gold. They took a lot of the some of the central reserves of the Cuban economy, and it explained in part why they were able to so easily enrich themselves once they got to South Florida. But we have a really good question here from Stalin's Mustache, which is wonderful, terrific name. I think that's the old name of Roland blog, by the way. But how do you think the U.S. will react to this? Well, I'm not sure, but I'm sure that it's going to have some retaliation depending on what the new government in Gabon decides to do with their primary industry, which is oil. So if we look here at the World Atlas, it says that the country has the 6th largest proven deposits of oil on the continent, having an estimated 3.68 billion barrels of oil reserves. The country has tapped into its immense oil deposits and has a daily production of oil estimated at 0.244 million barrels. Gabon only consumes a tiny fraction of its oil production. The country's daily consumption is 0.013 million barrels, with the bulk of the oil produced being sold to foreign markets. Oil is the largest export item from the country and is also the country's chief foreign exchange earner. Crude oil accounts for about 96% of the country's total exports to the U.S. Some of the crude oil is refined at the country's sole refinery, the Segura Oil Refinery, which is partly owned by the Gabonese government. The country also has enormous deposits of natural gas, the U.S. is clearly one of the central factors in keeping Gabon dependent. And remember that dependency functions in a dual form, usually. One, there's the dependence that is laid in the economies of these countries through the fact that neocolonialism and colonialism before that forced them to only produce whatever low-tech commodity was needed for imperialism. So, for instance, in Cuba, you have sugar primarily, but you also have tobacco. In Gabon, you have oil, right? But you also have some minerals. You have the mineral manganese, which is central for steel production, for metals, and it's one of the most mineral-rich places in Africa. But you have one form of dependency, which is we're going to force your country to produce that natural resource, which we can exploit the best. So focus on what we can exploit the best super exploit really the best from your country, whatever resources we can extract the best and super exploit the labor of. So that's a form of dependency, right? And what's interesting here is that if you look at the World Atlas, how they comment on it specifically, the dangers of oil reliance. What's never mentioned is what is the system that forces these countries into oil reliance. You know, they spin the same narrative about Venezuela. They spin it for a while about Cuba. It's sugar reliance and sugar dependency, because of course, you know, an effect of this economic dependency on one specific commodity or a couple of different commodities is that your whole economy is subject to global fluctuations in the market of the price of that commodity. So when, for instance, in Cuba, when sugar was doing good, you know, the elite in Cuba could be doing good, and when it was doing bad, the opposite. So that's one form of dependency, and another one is who is this being shipped towards usually, and it's almost always the case that the metropole, the central neocolonial power engaged in that relationship with the country, establishes a second form of dependency, which is not just on the thing that's being produced primarily, the monocrop, but on trading that and selling that, exporting that to the metropole. In the case of Cuba, it was selling sugar to the U.S. In the case of Gabon, it's selling oil, exporting oil to the U.S., which is 96% of its export sales of oil are going to the U.S.
Absolutely. I always say that what made me a Marxist was I studied geopolitics and economics in college for 4 years. And then reading Lenin's Imperialism, a 110-page book from 1917, I was able to understand the world and understand geopolitical happenings better than anything I had been taught. Whoops, sorry. More better. It helped me understand things better than anything I had been taught in 4 years of studying politics at the university level. And one of the chapters that was the most enlightening for me was chapter 4 on export capital, which if you haven't read Lenin's Imperialism or at least watched our reading guide of it, please do. It's such a vital and important text. But basically, he says that um, countries are going to outsource capital, but only the capital that they need to extract resources from the target country. So in Venezuela, like they have these giant oil reserves, the U.S. And British and Western oil companies set up drills to suck out the oil, but the surplus value is being transported back to the West. It's being sucked out of the country. So there's no investment in their productive forces or, you know, diversified kinds of fixed capital. And the entire economy becomes dependent on whatever commodity is being exported. So I often tell the story of my right-wing GOP economics professor who said that Venezuela's economy was dependent on oil because of socialism. And when I pressed her on it, she had no explanation beyond that. You know, and then I read Lenin's Imperialism and it's like, oh, it's the export capital. That makes perfect sense. So the bourgeois mode of analyzing the world has, you know, no explanation for this. They just say it's corruption, it's socialism, it's, you know, it's their fault for being economically stupid and backwards that they're dependent on these resources, when in reality it's because of the export capital and because of the super exploitation of these countries that they can't invest in developing their own productive forces. So hopefully these countries now are able to establish stable political leaderships, and as Carlos said, eventually realize that what they need to do is take hold of production. They need to move towards socialism, because if they allow market forces to work, and if they allow capitalism to continue, then the West will sink their claws back in and continue to exploit these countries and rob them for everything they're worth.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to go to Parenti as is usual here at the Institute. None of these countries are poor. You know, you don't go to a poor country to make money. They're extremely rich. They're extremely rich in resources and in people. What they are is super exploited. That is what explains their condition. They're super exploited, not inherently poor or inherently deficient or whatever other bullshit rationalization is provided in order to legitimize the continued expropriation and super exploitation of these countries. And Part of the importance of theory, which is this is, I think, what sets the Institute apart, specifically in our coverage of geopolitics, which is that we don't just explain to you what's happening with this specific place. And there's a lot of people that do that, and some of them do it very well. They provide you a very comprehensive picture, and I think they're correct insofar as they do that. But um, when you have the theoretical tools, you're able to see the systematic character of all of these things, and you're able to connect the dots in ways that are much more enlightening than just analyzing the sort of compilation and conjunction of crude facts of what is going on. So, if I may, real quick, I wanted to provide a few quotes from Kwame Nkrumah, of course, the revolutionary socialist Pan African leader of Ghana, who was couped in a U.S. CIA led coup while he was gone in China, but who wrote a very fundamental text called Neocolonialism, the Highest Stage of Imperialism, which brings into play how it is that imperialism in the post-war period is functioning through neocolonialism. There's four specific quotes that I wanted to get at. The first one gets at what Eddie has been talking about as flag democracy. He's going to say the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is, in theory, independent and has the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside. From where outside? Obviously, from the metropoles and the centers of the imperialist system that benefit from such a condition. Do you have anything to comment on that quote before I go to the next one, Eddie?
No, go for it.
So this is an interesting one for a few reasons, but he's going to say the result of neocolonialism is that foreign capital is used for the exploitation rather than for the development of the less developed parts of the world. Investment under neocolonialism increases rather than decreases the gap between the rich and the poor countries of the world. So this is already known by Lenin, obviously. But this is one of the central things, because people talk about how China is the leading export of capital, and they're like, oh my God, China's imperialist. The question is, what is China doing when it exports capital around the world? Is it impoverishing these nations? Is it exacerbating the divide between the so-called extreme wealth of China as a rich country and the poverty of these nations? It's doing the complete opposite. It's using that export of capital in the form that Nkrumah argued is a positive form, right? In the sense of it's capital that's being used to develop the productive forces of these countries, and in some way or another, it's giving them the conditions for the possibility of being more sovereign and self-sufficient. Any comments on that one before I go to the other one? What's the third one?
No, you can go for it.
Okay. Let me see here.
I'll give you a ding.
This is a good one because this is another thing that the leftists fall for and has come into prominence in the era of woke imperialism, where a form of woke or pseudo-progressive ideology has come to be the dominant form of rationalizing imperialist conquest around the world. But Nkrumah is going to argue the system of neocolonialism was therefore instituted, and in the short run, it has served the development of powers admirably. If it is in the long run, my bad, I read the wrong quote. Neocolonialism is based, it was the quote right after. Neocolonialism is based on the principle of breaking up former large united colonial territories into a number of small, non-viable states, which are incapable of independent development, and must rely on the former imperial power for defense and for internal security. Their economic and financial systems are linked, as in the colonial days, with those of the former colonial ruler. So there's a few parts going on here. This is, in essence, the importance of Pan-Africanism. Like the West has obviously divided these territories, and that old dictum of divide and conquer is at play here. It's easier to conquer and to control and to dominate these places when they're divided and fractured. It's harder to do that when they come together and are a solid block that can become self-sufficient. It is also it creates the conditions for the waging of what Nkrumah calls a limited form of warfare. You're not waging these outright massive wars. You're waging, as we're seeing in the war against Russia, the proxy war against Russia. You're waging these proxy wars, these limited wars, where you don't have to get involved at large in these massive war efforts, but you have a bunch of limited wars that you're dealing with. Now, where I see the extreme relevance of this is in the discourse that comes out of some liberal or so-called progressive left communities about Russia and about China, which under the guise of decolonialization, what they're promoting is this form of balkanization and this form of separating territories, which has historically been central for this process of neocolonialism in this stage of imperialism, because it allows the dominant imperial powers to dominate these areas and to continue extracting their resources and super exploiting their people and controlling their politics and economies and finance. It allows them to do that much easier once you're separated because they're weaker. And this is what, unfortunately, some segments of the left desire seen in places like Russia and China, under again this guise of progressive decolonialism, decolonize Russia, decolonize China. You're even getting U.S. State Department officials talking in those terms. But yeah, any comment on that one? I had one more, if you don't mind. No comment? Okay. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is the last quote from Nkrumah. He says, in the first place, the rulers of the neocolonial states derive their authority to govern not from the will of the people, but from the support which they obtain from their neocolonialist masters. They have therefore little interest in developing education, strengthening the bargaining power of their workers employed by the capitalist firms, or indeed of taking any step which would challenge the colonial pattern of commerce and industry, which is the object of neocolonialism to preserve. Why are the people in Gabon, why are the people in Niger, why were the people in Mali and Guinea and Burkina Faso, why are they standing up to these governments? Why are they overthrowing these governments via coups? Is it because it's a government that actually represents the people of those countries? No. It's because their governments are stooges for imperialism and neocolonialism. They're puppet governments of U.S. imperialism and French imperialism, whose interest when they rule is not in increasing the living standards of their people, expressing the general will of their people. Their interest is their personal enrichment, which is done through serving the masters whom they actually have to respond to, which is the U.S. and France and these multinational corporations in general.
For sure, that's a solid quote there. I like putting the theory to the geopolitical analysis because it makes it so much easier. I mean, that's the point I was getting at with Lenin's imperialism really helping me understand what I had learned, the factual accumulation of facts that I had gotten in 4 years of studying politics in undergrad. The theory just really helps you tie it all together.